Sherlock, a young high-ranking demon, aims to become the greatest demon lord in his world. For that he will need to own a dungeon and build it into a great place, and today is the day he finally owns a dungeon. Dungeons are mysterious places full of wonderful and often horrifying things, but only the demons who own dungeons are given the title of Demon Lord and command the respect of other demons. The dungeon owners could earn a lot of money from the dungeon, and also gather up their own forces. Sherlock was not always a high-ranking demon. He was born and raised in the slums. That is what drives him to become a demon lord and grow in glory and wealth. He worked hard for hundreds of years, and with the money he saved he bought a dungeon for himself. He declares to the empty dungeon that this was the beginning of his story and he would surpass all other demon lords soon. But his dream of building the top dungeon is still too far away from him. As Sherlock activates the core of the dungeon. Using his magic and personal seal, he laughs as he tells the reason for buying this dungeon. He did not buy the ragtag dungeon because he was charmed by the succubus saleswoman, or because the surface world was close to him, or because he liked challenges. It was the only dungeon he could afford, and he was now the owner of the cheapest dungeon in the underworld. But nothing good is going to come from complaining about the dungeon, and Sherlock starts working. The dungeon core activates, and Sherlock is excited to start working, but he is shocked when he sees a face in the core that talks to him. It tells that it was called Blue and calls Sherlock master. There was nothing like this mentioned in the manual, and Sherlock reads it quickly to see what could be done about this situation. He thinks that the saleswoman gave him a fake core or a defective one. His doubts are even more aggravated when the dungeon core starts saying words he had never heard before. Like time travel or aborigines, Sherlock decides to go and return the cheap core and work hard to buy another one. While the core pleads to get him to stay, he tells his new master that he picked up those words from another world and there was nothing wrong with him, but Sherlock is not listening to him and the dungeon core explodes, leaving only the floating face that requests him to stop. He asks Sherlock to not return him, and calls him the future great demon lord. Those words stop Sherlock right in his tracks, and he is impressed by the core. Not only could it think and talk, but it was also wise enough to see that he was going to become a great demon lord in the future. Sherlock is tempted by the flattery of Blue and decides to give him a chance. He tells the core of his ambition, and what would the dungeon have once it became the top dungeon in the underworld. Blue is happy to oblige and says that he would help Sherlock in achieving his dream. But the first thing to do now is to summon monsters. Different dungeons could spawn different types of monsters according to their level, but since Sherlock's dungeon was at the lowest level, it could only summon goblins. He decides to go on with summoning right away, but Blue stops him and suggests a better idea. Instead, he says that the demon lord would have to pay goblins for their hard work, but he knew about the goblins from another world. That would work for free and even give him money too. Sherlock is shocked and asks Blue what he meant. Blue tells him that it was called an in-game purchase in the other world. Sherlock doesn't understand half the words his dungeon core uses, but decides to give it a try. He asks Blue how could he summon the goblins from another world and form a contract with them. Blue tells him that he had to create a server first that was the connecting link between the two worlds. For that, Sherlock had to pour magic into him for 1 week, so he could create a server from his memories. Sherlock works with Blue and finally builds a server, but before summoning the goblins, Blue tells Sherlock that the alien goblins would do some childish things like giving weird nicknames to themselves, fighting, or trading among themselves, and the best way to manage them was through the official webpage. Sherlock is confused by another strange phrase, and Blue explains that it was like an embassy between the two worlds. Blue asks his master to create and manage the official website of the dungeon. To recruit goblins, he presents a computer to Sherlock and has already done most of the basic work. Sherlock decides to give a catchy name to his dungeon and names it Dungeon Eternal Kingdom. In the human world, people see the advertisement for the first virtual reality online game, Dungeon Eternal Kingdom, and it was looking for first test players. The humans who see the ad are really excited and sign up for it. Sherlock is shocked on seeing their response and eagerness to join him. Blue tells him that there were about 800 million players or goblins in that world, and they had to select only 100 of them as the first test players. Sherlock selects 100 test players he sees and tells them qualified for the first round of tests, but before summoning them, Sherlock has some preparations to make. He withdraws the money from his bank account and goes to buy supplies for the goblins, but he has only 1,000 magic stones, and that is not enough to buy everything he needs. Even the cheapest iron pickaxes are much more expensive than he thought, but luckily there is a cheaper offer for dungeon owners to establish a blacksmith shop in the dungeon itself. Sherlock likes the offer already, but Blue tells him that he could sell weapons made in the blacksmith shop to the goblins as well. He buys the shop, and with the remaining magic stones he buys food for the goblins, but before summoning the goblins, Blue tells him that he must post novice missions. He explains to Sherlock that they were simple tasks to acquaint the goblins with this world, and he should reward them for completing them. Sherlock says that he will go bankrupt if he has to award goblins with magic stones, but Blue tells him that he can use coins as the goblins like gold and other precious metals. A blacksmith named Simba comes to Sherlock's dungeon to set up shop. He explains the terms of their contract and starts setting up his furnace. With that, it is time to summon the goblins, but nothing happens when Sherlock uses his summoning spell, and Blue tells him that the goblins were fine-tuning their appearance. The first one is named Kuruko Yumikawa, and he fearlessly explores the dungeon and interacts with the demon lords. Soon the remaining goblins start popping up one after the other, and they are mesmerized by the dungeon. They were just humans who thought they were inside a game, but it was far too realistic. The goblins are quite chaotic, and only get in order when Sherlock shows off his aura and asks them to pledge their loyalty to him in the dungeon. Then he asks the goblins to take up their missions and start working to build the dungeon. The goblins look at the tasks and rewards and start doing them. Sherlock thinks that with the mining in the dungeon he would be able to procure armor and weapons to strengthen his hired goblins. That way his dungeon would grow in strength and face stronger monsters. But the goblins start approaching him and asking for various things he does not understand. He is perplexed by their behavior and wonders how are they not afraid of dying. But despite their weird behavior, the alien goblins are efficient workers, and he rewards the goblins who complete their quests. Blue tells him that they needed to add more content to their dungeon for the entertainment of the goblins. It was a game to them, and the more content there was, the more motivated they would be to work. Sherlock worries that he doesn't have enough magic stones to provide them with entertainment, but Blue says that the goblins could fight monsters. For that they would be thrilled to do quests that involve killing monsters, and he should give them weapons and armor as a reward. For that Sher understands the gist of it, and goes to check out the nest of spider monsters. As the next addition to the dungeon game, there would be a large number of spider minions, and the Spider Queen would serve as the boss. He thinks that this challenge would be enough to satisfy his goblins, but Blue informs him that one goblin had died. Sherlock goes back and is concerned that the tasks he gave were too hard, but Blue tells him that the goblin died to test out the resurrection system of the game. His soul was trapped inside Blue, and he could return it after the body of the goblin was restored by the dungeon owner. Sherlock heals the body of the goblin, and Blue returns his soul. The goblin is revived, and now the other goblins also want to try it out, but Sherlock gets angry and scolds them, and says that they should not die without the need for it. But once that has been done, Sherlock edits the official website and adds a new map and monsters to defeat. The Spider Queen is the main boss, and the site tells that the demon lord Sherlock will give his favor to anyone who brought her hair to him. He asks Blue why he had to give out such a reward, and Blue replies that the goblins liked it when their existence and efforts were acknowledged. Sherlock thinks that the goblins sounded like humans from the surface world, oblivious that they were humans from another world. But before that, he wants to see what the goblins said about him on the website, and is overjoyed on seeing that they liked his dungeon so much. The goblin Amikala has created a complete walkthrough of his first day in the game. He tells about everything with great excitement, from the game engine to the visuals to the NPCs. He says that at first he thought it would be a sham, but the game was so good that he almost felt like a goblin. There were settings to control the pain sensitivity and death, and the game also felt too real. Even though reviving was possible, it could not be done without leaving your body intact. If you lost your body, you would have to respawn by entering the login room again. The blacksmith symbol was one of the two NPCs, and it was not smart to mess around with him. He owns the only shop in the building, and everything is bought and sold there. The reward was copper coins that were awarded by the second NPC. The demon lord Locke, the owner of the dungeon. The goblin also explains that nothing in the game seemed like a game. There was no health bar or profile page, and the growth was like the real world. The dungeon core was called Blue, and he also gave out tasks according to the needs of the dungeon. All the changes made to the dungeon were permanent, and things were not restored on logging out. The players could also not go against the demon lord Sherlock, who could command them to do anything. Sherlock watches the entire video and is surprised that the goblins were so excited about working that they made an entire video about the dungeon. Their comments were also too weird, and Sherlock decides to do other things first. He goes to the dungeon and asks Simba to create weapons and armor for the goblins to clear the spider's nest. Simba is concerned that the demon lord was sending the goblins to their death, but Sherlock says that the goblins were rather excited about it. But Simba says that the goblins had collected enough wool to forge enough weapons for them. He asked Sherlock that since he had hired 100 goblins so early, he would need more people setting up shop too. Sherlock refuses him but does not tell him that the goblins were working for free and he had no money to afford any other employee. Simba is surprised when Sherlock tells him that he should make a price list to sell the weapons to goblins and not distribute them for free. The demon lord explains that it would be a good way to keep the coins circulating and maintain their value. Simba shows him the daggers and armor he has made, and Blue tells him to add panel explanations to these weapons. Sherlock is impressed and decides that it would make the game more interesting for the goblins. They could grow stronger and use better weapons with better stats. He decides to incorporate the reputation system for giving out his favor to the goblins with the weapons system, and there would be limitations of reputation to equip better gears. The goblins wake up the next morning and decide to check out Simba's shop, but they are shocked to find new content without an update or server maintenance. But Sherlock is ready to give them a new mission. They had to clear the spider's nest for the glory of their dungeon, but there is a twist that does not make the gob problems happy. There were only 5 sets of armor and daggers made by Simba, and their price was kept at 600 copper coins. Sherlock had made the calculations and found out that none of the goblins could have earned more than 100 coins yesterday. They would now be motivated to work even harder and earn more coins. But he is shocked on seeing the goblins talking among themselves and buying the copper coins for their home currency. Sherlock is shocked that they were willing to spend real money to buy something that was practically worthless. Blue tells him that if they make a mechanism for players to spend money to buy items in the game, their dungeon could become rich very soon. But right now 5 of the richest people have bought the weapons and are ready to fight the spiders. They go to the spider's nest and their leader is a goblin named Arthur, and Sherlock is watching them from the dungeon. But once they come across the spiders, they realize it was not going to be as easy as other games. Arthur jumps on a spider and stabs it but is wounded in the action. More spiders come to aid their injured comrade, and the 5 goblins are defeated and killed easily. The spiders did not even leave their body, and the players had to respond by entering the login room again. But even though they died, the goblins are very eager to tell their companions about the spiders. The spiders were huge and looked too real. A lot of attention had been given to detail, and it showed the goblins are thrilled that the battle events in the game were so difficult, and that would mean high rewards too. Sherlock is amused watching the goblins and goes back to the spider's nest to collect the equipment, but as he is collecting them, finds that his goblin party has killed 1 spider monster before they were wiped out, and there is something strange inside the body of the spider. Sherlock suspects it could be a magic item and teleports the body back to the dungeon. The goblins are amazed by the teleportation spells, and Arthur and others realize that it was the same spider they killed. Sherlock appoints Arthur and Yumikala, who were both members of the assault party, as assistants to Simba for finding out the magic item inside the spider's belly, and it turns out to be a green orb which appears quite valuable. Sherlock decides to reward Arthur and Yumikala by granting them a level 1 reputation in the dungeon. He takes them to the city Winterfell with him using a teleport scroll. The goblins are impressed by the teleportation skills and are ready to wail out if they could buy skills like that using real money. Once inside Winterfell, the 2 goblins are shocked at the city. While they follow around their lord, they wonder why so much depth and detail was added to the city if it was not launched as a part of the game yet. But Sherlock doesn't allow them to wander off, and they can only see things nearby. They take screenshots of everything they see, and Yumikawa is excited to compile it all in his blogs. Sherlock decides to go to a magic item store to appraise the green orb he found in the spider's belly. An old goblin is minding the shop and he welcomes him. The 2 goblins are trying to check out everything, but they cannot see the panel with information. Arthur keeps telling Yumakawa that he feels so constrained by the lack of a purchasing system. If there was one, he would buy everything. The goblin shopkeeper is annoyed by their antics and tells Sherlock that his servants did not have proper manners, but Sherlock shows him the green orb and asks to appraise it. He looks at the orb and licks it to appraise it, and Sherlock decides it was not wise to tell him that thing came out of a spider's belly. The goblin shopkeeper says that it was the key to a magic ruin and was very valuable. He asks him to sell it to their shop for 5,000 magic stones, but Sherlock finds the cost too low. He pitches his final offer, 6,000 magic stones and a fairy that they had captured. The fairy was skilled in alchemy and gardening and could make high-level potions from simple ingredients. Sherlock thinks that the offer was a good one, and takes it. He goes to a florist, and asks him to sell him pots, soil, and seeds to grow a herb garden. The florist tells him that it would cost 1,000 magic stones, but Sherlock has more than enough money right now. He teleports back to the dungeon with the 2 goblins, the caged fairy, and stone golems from the florist shop who would help set up the greenhouse. The other goblins are really excited that even more new content was coming out. Arthur and Yumikawa are now the most reputed goblins in the dungeon, as they got to visit the city with the Demon Lord and participated in 2 hidden events. Arthur is a big spender in games and keeps on saying that he wanted the game to develop a purchasing system as soon as possible, but as they return, the fairy faints. She had been uncooperative with the store and had not eaten food when they offered her to eat. Blue tasks the goblins to take care of the fairy, and they think that she was another NPC in the game. They ask the fairy if she needed anything when she wakes up, but she fears the demons surrounding her. Sherlock approaches her and tells her that he would let her go home to the surface if she worked hard and earned 50,000 magic stones for the dungeon using her skills. But the fairy tells him that she would not sell her soul to a demon and would prefer dying. Sherlock leaves her alone, and as he goes away, Blue asks him why wasn't he torturing the fairy to obey him. Sherlock says that the demons were not cruel anymore. They did not torture other creatures to obey them. With that, the goblins are concerned about the nature of the next quest. If the fairy did not cooperate with their demon lord, it was unto them to convince her, but then they call it a day, and Sherlock decides to check out the reaction of the people about the new content in the game. He opens the official website and comes across another video by the Yumikawa. This time he explained everything about the new content in the game. He says that the game had some unknown method of updating the content without server maintenance, and it was cool. The battle at the spider's nest was tough, but it triggered 2 hidden quests. And even though the players are willing to spend a lot of money, the game does not support it yet, and expects them to develop through manual training, and he felt stronger in the real world due to the training he did in the game. He explains that how he and Arthur played a key role in defeating the spider with the other goblins, and then got to visit Winterfell with the Demon Lord. He is pretty sure that Winterfell would be unlocked for the players in the next content release, and everyone had a good reason to be excited about it, as it was like a real city. He also talks about the newly brought fairy who seemed to be at odds with the Demon Lord, but that was probably a part of their quest, and he was excited to play the game tomorrow. Sherlock is impressed by the diligence of the goblin and asks Blue why was he putting in so much effort. Blue tells him that it was one of the many things players did. They like to make strategies and tell other players about them. The goblins have already earned enough money to buy more equipment and gather a larger team to clear the spider's nest, and Sherlock is excited to see how far can they take his dungeon. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more content like this. Stay awesome. Goodbye. Thank you.